Yeah, so I'm Francois. So welcome. Thank you for attending this. Just a disclaimer. So I'm heavily jet lagged and heavily caffeinated. So if I say something weird or very French, just tell me and I will try to correct that. Okay. Rings was made by myself and a team, a very talented team. So Mieko Murakami did the art, and the very specific art of Rings. And we had an exceptional music team with Disaster Piece, Matteo Lugo, and Eric von Amerongen, who did a great work on the SFX notably. And I did the writing and the game dev, if you want. So I'm going to talk about Rings. Rings is a swipe your own adventure. It can be described as a mix of Tinder and Game of Thrones, and it's a relatively accurate way to describe the game. You play a dynasty or king, taking binary decisions, so yes or no, by swiping. And you have a double objective, which is to rule as long as possible, and to discover the secrets of your dynasty. And that's the long game that you play over centuries, generally. It's been quite successful. So what am I going to talk about today? I don't know that yet, so it will be a bit dynamic, I hope. What I know for sure is what this talk will not be about. So this talk is not about a list of success, of things you have to do to make a successful indie games, as it's not a pipe either. So I think a success is the result of a very dynamic path. We made good choices, but we had also a lot of luck and probably some bias. So I really want you to be careful about what I'm going to say today, and I will need you, the audience, to take some distance with what I'm going to say. So use your critical thinking, try to extract the interesting matter in what I'm going to say today. The useful information is something that's specific to your own use and practice that I don't know. So that's an important point I wanted to make. And I will start by an example. So be careful, this is very treacherous. For me, laziness is my goal in life. So just like in this drawing from Valentin, I dream of myself naked on a bed with scratching a cat, if you want. Because game development is a very painful enterprise. You know that, all of you. Where you work like hell with a very, very uncertain success. It's not really sane nor sustainable to make games, let's be honest about that. What I mean by that is not that I am lazy, of course, but my goal is to sort of search that optimization of all my means and my design to go towards this goal of being lazy. I'm not saying I'm lazy. We're all professionals who spent a lot of hours on bloody bugs and the 2-pixel height animation that needs to be perfect. And I'm just like you. I do that. But I try as much as possible to make the most of the time I spent on game making. And instead of, I always try to use that in a useful way. I think being the most efficient sloth possible is a very interesting drive in game making, because it's always where you will find new mechanics. You will optimize your design choices, and optimization is not just something that's related to game engine and code. Optimization is also about practice and about the way you make the game. Yourself as a designer. So I will start this talk about Rings, around Rings inception, the scribbling of Rings, from the first sketch we made with Mieko, the artist. So we talked about this idea of making a game around the same mechanic as Tinder, and the main elements of the game were already present from the start, so that's the first visual of Rings. You play a king managing a kingdom, so you have advisor. They are coming and talking to you about the kingdom, but you never see the cathedral. You always see just the advisor, and this creates a gap that we will see is interesting. There are only two answers, yes or no, but each one has a profound impact on the kingdom that you see on the data at the bottom of the screen. And that's it. And we had this from the start, really. It's like 2 weeks after starting the game. This was heavily inspired by Nerial from The Vine for the visuals, and by Asher also, Royals, which was a very important inspiration. You will see a lot of small mechanics that we used in Reigns, like a 1 a year turn and stuff like that. So to give a bit of perspective to this first sketch, I just compare it to the final game, like 1 week after the release. It's mostly the same, basically the same layout, and as I told you, I always aim to be lazy, so I can't just scratch everything. But there are two interesting changes that I want to talk about. First, you see the data are on the top of the screen and not the bottom, like at the start. So that's the sort of dumb test you have to do very early in development. So as the game was supposed to be played mostly on mobile, when your player play on mobile, he generally has the thumb. If you want to swipe, the thumb is on the bottom of the screen. So you never see the impact of the swipe if you put your data at the bottom of the screen. So that's a dumb test. You have to do that very early, not to push that sort of bad idea too far. The other point on this is that we scratch the numbers, as you probably noticed. So that was a difficult design decision that occurred very late in the development. For a very simple reason, when you playtest that sort of thing, the player will always prefer the first version because it's easier for them to optimize their decision if they see the impact. But we decided against this because we noticed that very quickly the players stopped reading the text. And they were just optimizing the system, if you want. And that's not what we wanted. We wanted to have the focus on the text, really, as we will see just after that, on writing Reigns. So when we first playtested the game, I quickly noticed that players wanted to go beyond the management side of the game, which was the very basic version we had. They naturally started to create links between cards that I didn't in any way link together, like building a cathedral and fight a plague outbreak. So they were creating their own stories within the game. So we decided to support that and encourage and build basically the game on that. So that's the writing. It has 3 points. I will start by evocative writing, which is a very useful tool where we don't use that much in games, and that's a shame, I think. If you see this picture, it's a still life. It's a bit boring. I mean, it's called Breakfast Table with Blackberry Pie. But if you look a bit more closely and you think of this painting as a scene in a game, it's actually very entertaining and very thrilling. I mean, what's this glass broken on the left? Is it the result of a fight, or does it contain poison? Why are things left out like that? There's a cane in the middle, you see, and it hides something. Maybe it's a weapon. And the thing on the right, is it a clock? Maybe it is a time travel device. And the key, what does the key open? So that's interesting things that happen by evocation, and I use that a lot in Reigns. If you take this card, for example, you got the unknown body, you got the hands missing, you got the garrison and the dungeon. So all this creates some sort of structure to the whole game that we really heavily worked, that we used a lot, because this evocates the kingdom that that's behind the game, and that was very important to really build on this. About comedy and rhythm, we quickly discovered that there was a very strong comical gap between the decision you take that impact your kingdom. You send people to their death, you deal with earthquakes, you deal with a lot of heavy stuff actually, and the way you have to deal with this by swiping, which is like the most casual way of dealing with a situation, if you want. And that creates a gap that's very comical. And only creating very serious cards was actually very funny for the player. And players were like, well, how do I do that? And the fact that the only options were swiping makes it very funny. And we basically just build on this, adding more and more weird cards, more and more with unfathomable consequences that generally bring you to your death very quickly. As some sort of illustration of our casual power that just deal with binary decisions is bad and can quickly become sour. Also an important thing for the writing of this was the rhythm. The rhythm in the game is very important, and it took me some time to learn to do that rhythm. The pace of the game is very quick, and you have to go from tack, 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 and boom, you die. It's like I had to keep in everything I wrote for the games this sort of very strong rhythm that generally finish with these deaths that are like a clash that just breaks you in your pace, if you want. Making that sort of thing what was difficult for me to find the right tone for the game. I had to train myself to write rings cards. There's no easy way to do that. So I wrote 770 cards in the game, and it's really only after the first 200 cards that I had the tone, I had the way to play with my mechanics, if you want, and how to define the sentences so they make sense. I studied French literature, and we like to make long sentences, so it was very painful for me to do that. So probabilistic-driven narratives, so that's also very painful. I'm sorry about that. As I told you, players started to create their own narratives within the game. So we decided to encourage that, and that was difficult because we also needed to keep the flow of the game. The flow of the game is very important in rings. You really have to be able to play hundreds of cards in sessions of 20 minutes, for example, which is generally the time you spend on the game. That was basically creating a narrative that's basically infinite, because you can loop and loop and loop. Like on Tinder, you can loop and loop as long as you want. So to do that, I created a system called that I call probabilistic-driven narrative, because it's a bit pedantic and I like it. So I couldn't do branching path narrative, especially as I am to be lazy. It's just crazy. You have 4 draws here. Imagine I would deal with hundreds of cards. It's not possible, and it creates a lot of garbage. So instead I created this probabilistic-driven narrative. So it's a relatively simple idea based on basic probability, and that are actually very useful tools that I will try to explain here. So basically, I check the state of the kingdom, which is made of different variables that I collect, okay? And against that state, I select all the cards that fit in that state. And I put them in this bag, like a bag of cards, if you want, that adapts to the number of cards that are in the bag. And I select one randomly. The fact that the cards have different volume in the bag makes that enables to generate different sort of narratives that will adapt to the state of the kingdom. So It's a very simple system that creates narratives that could be purely random, like in draw 4 at the bottom here. I selected in that kingdom state cards that are have relatively the same weight. So the card that's selected is purely randomly selected. I can also color that random selection by adding cards that have a bigger volume, and generally I do that when it's around different thematic, like for example the war or the spice trade. So the cards that are related to the spice trade will be fewer but bigger, so they have a better chance to be selected by the system within a system that stays random. So I still have variety in what's happening, and also I can use the kingdom state in a restrictive way. So around very small or narrow narratives, even linear narrative, like one card after the other, and that's what you have in draw 3, and I will show example of that. And basically, that's the system that structures everything that's happening in reigns. And as players never know if a card is the direct consequences of a previous choice or a more random selection by the engine, everything becomes meaningful. So every link between the cards actually makes sense for the player, because they don't really know if what they're deciding is has an impact on the next card selected. Okay, so this is I told you it was painful, so this is I'm writing reigns. Basically, I'm writing the card in a spreadsheet. Sorry about that, it's a bit of and I parse that in Unity. Each line in this spreadsheet is a card, and it works like that. So you got the question and the advisor, which is the bearer, the guy who bears the news, if you want. After that, I got the lock turn, which is the number of turns the card will be locked until it's able to be played again in the probabilistic system, and the weight of the cards, which is the volume of the card in the bag, if you want. After that, I got the conditions, which are basically I check if the card fits in different kingdom states by this system of conditions. And after that, I got the answers, yes. So that's the answer, yes. So both on the values of the kingdom, the different 4 values that you see at the top, and on more generally on the kingdom state. And everything, all this affects the kingdom state that evolves basically at every card that you select. And I have the same for the no answer. Okay, so that was writing reigns. That was the structure and the tools I developed at the start, and don't make any difference between the code, which is basically what you have behind the engine, and the writing, because all that process was made basically together, and I really switched from the code to the writing quickly. So these three things I just saw in writing reigns enabled us to make the prototype with 100 cards, which is the thing we showed to developer. So now the main part was to actually write the whole game. I call that breaking reigns because I really think it was more about creatively breaking things than it was about seriously writing cards. I have this sort of perverse urge to break and hack my own systems, if you want, and because I think it's important to surprise the player, and the fact that in reigns you can die, but you carry on with the next king in the dynasty and so on and so forth, sort of limited the frustration that it can create, although it's quite frustrating sometimes. So. The party, it's one of the things I'm the most proud of in reigns. It's that we did the impossible, the unthinkable. You can die of having too much stuff in reigns, including money. And it generally happens like this. So you maximize your money, and you throw a party, and then you die choking, and it happens every single time. So I'm serious. I received 8 mail about that, you know, because you expected as a player, as a normal person, actually, to be able to just gaffer stuff without boundaries. And I think on the contrary, the notion of power is something that needs to be balanced, and that doesn't make sense if it's not balanced. So yeah, I'm very proud of this, even if it was a bit cheesy to die every time because of the party. But this is the sort of thing that make the message of the game went through, and so that was fun. Okay, so the dungeons. So managed to squeeze a rudimentary procedural dungeon crawler in Rings, which is very inspired by Land of Lords. So there's the same system as everything, except you don't have advisor, but you have the dungeon, and you go left or right, and things happen. So I won't spoil you. And that's interesting because we use the same probabilistic system as everything else. But instead of having the system on the whole set of cards, I just narrow it to a subsystem, a subset of cards, which are the cards of the dungeon. So basically, I do like this. So I open on the consequences of the card that starts the dungeon. I open dungeon 1, okay? And after that, it will collect, the system will collect all the cards that share that name and play the probabilistic system only among them, okay? And that's how I randomize my dungeon. And after that, I can loop in the dungeon by just recalling the same subset of cards. I use this system a lot, notably in the Red Dwarf, which is like a game in the game, and the duel on the right. So the duel both have a very light layer of code on top of the general system, but I tend to keep everything in the spreadsheet. So all the things that you read here are in the spreadsheet and not in something else. The Devil. So the Devil, we noticed something very troubling about Tinder. It's like, it's a hell of a design, but quite literally. So I mean that, like Tantalus, you're a bit stuck in some sort of loop that's both numbing, compelling, and endless. So you see the apple, you want to reach for it, and you can't, so you come back, but you try again, and you can't, and so on and so forth. It's if you replace that with profile on Tinder, it's a bit the same mechanic. So this is how the idea very concretely entered the idea of the devil entered the game. Basically, the devil trapped you in this endless loop of kings, and you have to trick him in to escape and solve the game. So this structure, the devil backstory was very important to structure the whole game, give an end goal to the player, and also gather all the stories around a main plot like this. It was also something we used to trick our YouTubers and freak them out a bit. Because when you reach 666, you played 63 years, so you know you know how the game works. You're sort of familiar with it. You played 10 to 15 minutes, so you played through 100 cards about. That's the perfect moment to just break everything, and that works very well with YouTubers, notably. So I want to conclude now. I'll try to sum up the main idea that's behind most of the things I described today, which is basically that for me, game dev, and I try to do it in Rings, game dev is more an exploration than the completion of a system. I think it's more interesting to try to explore a concept than just try to make the perfect game, if you want. what I mean by perfect system, I think we sort of all game designer wants to create the perfect game that's perfectly balanced, like a perfect machine where every cog just is connected to every other cog, and that it's perfect because it's complete and clean and defined in a specific space, like the big machine in Modern Times from Charlie Chaplin. I think this is a bit past this vision of things. I think it's more interesting to start to think about exploration of concepts and exploration of game mechanics. It's a different attitude. So exploration, what do I mean by that? I really mean the two phases of exploration, which is the preparation and the expedition itself. During preparation, you will try to be as precise and as perfect as possible. Actually, you have to gather all the skills you will need to make the game as you want it. You will have to define a budget and a planning and gather the tools that you will need to do the expedition itself. You have to stabilize the core game mechanics and the main code while keeping them scalable and expandable, okay? So it goes really beyond the idea of a basic prototype. You have to think in your prototype, it's not just the prototype, it's the prototype and every tool that you will need to actually bring your game to its final state. After that, you've got the exploration phase on the right. So it's when you go exploring, so you manage your resources dynamically. You don't stay on your toes, okay? You have to move, you have to be dynamic, and adapt everything along the way, like we did, for example, with the Devil, that was not initially in the game, and we sort of adapted also the game to fit that sort of backstory. You may have an end goal, like reaching the South Pole here, but maybe you don't, and it's not very important. I think the most important thing happens during the journey, because it's where the science happens, it's where you will actually discover new stuff. And it's where I think it becomes interesting to create variations around game mechanics. And it's what we tried to do in Rings. Until very late in the dev, I had no idea when the game would be finished. 770 cards is actually very, very arbitral. So it's not really something I defined at the start. It's when through playtest and through my own understanding, I thought that the game was complete, if you want. So as a result of this exploration, Rings is not a perfect system and it's not a perfect game. I mean, it's pretty imbalanced and some things don't actually make a lot of sense. But it's an humble try at exploring a concept and just make the most of it. And I hope to think that's what also a reason for the success of Rings. Why am I spending so much time on this? Because I think this idea of exploration is actually, it's not just an interesting way to make games as a designer. That's a bit selfish. I think it's always about the player, and in the end, it's always about the players. When you consider a game design as an exploration, you embark your players with you, and you make them part of your exploration. Like in Spelunky, some things happen in the game that are not anticipated by the designers themselves. You let them find different routes in your games, you let them break your game, and they will make a connection that you didn't anticipate. They will use their imagination and their critical thinking, and I think we need that. On the contrary, when you attempt to make a game that's supposed to be a perfect system, the player is just generally only considered as an operator the overall game itself. Like, an operator defined by a demographic and a set of behaviors. Like Charlie Chaplin in modern times, really, the only way you have to interact or to become creative with that sort of system is actually to break it and walk away. So I personally think that this way of designing stuff is a very strong poison of our modern societies, and it's not just games, it's a lot of stuff that goes far, far beyond what games. My mentor and a guy who was a philosopher and semantician, Jean Shagibov, said it's an objectal mechanist sort of way of thinking. By that, he means some sort of pragmatism which is actually trapped in a set of values that make it toxic. Okay. I don't want to finish this talk on this. I want to finish this talk on the metamorphobet, which is for me a perfect example of this sort of stuff, far better than rings. Because with very simple mechanics, like a couple of ideas, like discovering the letters and the words, and very simple interactions, which are basically touch and drag, and a lot of very interesting tools to play with that. He created a word that's both evocative, crazy, mad, meaningful. So that's very interesting. If you don't know that, just check it out. Thank you. So I hope we have a couple of minutes for questions. There are a microphone somewhere. Yeah, here and here. If you want to ask questions. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Chris. Just want to ask, do you use Tinder?
What I answer to that is I signed a non-disclosure agreement with my wife. Any other question? Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah, well, ask the question, I will repeat it, sir.
What's another game that you think breaks itself well?
So the question is, what other games you think breaks itself well? I think, yeah, I would say in a controlled way, definitely Spelunky. I think it's very important work because it's not broken, but it sort of allowed some sort of broken behaviors from the players, and that's very interesting stuff, I think. Yeah. All right. Thank you.